Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be the Matchday 7 cheat sheet. It's the finals. It's Spain versus England of the European Championships for 2024. And we've arrived at a game where I think we did expect for these two teams to really reach there, right? When we actually started out from the round of 16, there was a pretty high chance that England were going to make it all the way towards the finals. And to be fair, they have done, I think, played their best game as well versus Netherlands so far. As far as Spain, of course, I think over the tournament, progressively, people felt that they became the dominant team from their quadrant and then eventually their bracket as well when they beat France. So we've now approached a stage where we have probably set expectations for teams, and England, as I said, have probably played their best game so far, whereas Spain, for the most part, have played well. But of course, facing off versus tougher teams like Germany and France haven't had that dominant of a performance, which is also just simply to be expected. However, I think, what's useful, of course, is once again referring to a little bit of market data, also trying to understand as well where things are at. When I look at, for example, the Opta analyst odds, I believe it's around 60-40 to Spain. So actually, comparing and contrasting, for example, to, let's say, Spain versus Germany, Spain versus France, much more one-sided in the estimations of, let's say, an AI model. Betting odds, as presented by Rob TFPL, as always, do give him a follow on Twitter, puts really good information out on X, and ultimately, offers you a good sort of avenue and sort of an objective metric really to try and understand how we can contextualize this fixture. And so right now, I believe the odds suggest 59% for Spain to win, 41% for England to win, and projected goals a little bit more in favor of Spain. Obviously, clean sheet odds a little bit in favor of Spain. So, using that as context, I do think we expect Spain to be the favorite, but it is one game of football, and obviously you can choose your own narratives. Starting with the cheat sheet, though, I've done the attackers, and I've split them with the defenders. Starting with the attackers, just because there are so few players left in the game, I do think that it's worth sort of classing players, once again, agnostic of price, and simply because there are so few options, I've just done it in terms of the order of my preference. I think Olmo, Foden, and potentially Fabian Ruiz are probably the most interesting picks for me. The reason why I like Fabian Ruiz so much, and I've kept him higher than, let's say, players like Rodri, for example, is the simple reason that I think he plays very similar minutes to someone like Rodri. And at the same time, of course, when you look at the sort of consistent positions that he's actually getting into in the box versus some tougher teams, hard to actually say that I'm against Ruiz, right? If you look at, for example, the chance that, let's say, Yamal lofted onto him in the first few minutes of the game versus France. If you look at the fact that, let's say, Fabian Ruiz also has more ball recoveries than most of the other defenders, so he's kind of like a little bit of a halfway house between, the true DM like Rice and Rodri, and obviously one of the more attacking offensive players. So for Spain, he plays a sort of dual role with Olmo. At times, obviously, you can see him enter the box, and I think he gets into really good spots. So for that reason, I do really like Fabian Ruiz. I think his minutes are obviously better than some of the other Spanish attackers. And of course, if we expect Spain to do well, presumably, of course, if you're sort of hedging towards, let's say, a result within extra time or within regulation time, then of course you might prefer players like Williams, like Yamal a bit more. But as the game progresses, potentially, Fabian Ruiz could be that much better as well. So I do like Olmo the most, though, to be honest, going back to it, as the 10 for Spain, as someone who should play the bulk of the minutes within that game here versus England. And maybe, of course, if Spain do well, I have to assume that most of the actions will be coming through either Olmo or Yamal. They have been our most productive players in the tournament. Yamal from the perspective of underlying stats, expected goals, expected assists. Olmo from actually just simply sheer output, even though he's actually played less minutes than some of his peers. And so that's really good for Olmo. For Foden, I just thought he was so brilliant within the previous game. And definitely, I think stylistically, you can argue with the small, I suppose, tactical shifts, which is almost more Saka right wing back type, back three, within England's structure. Foden has had, the space and the time needed to sort of operate within his favorite areas in the pitch. And he has looked brilliant. And once again, the bookies odds seemingly have trended still more towards Foden's favor. So I do really like him as a pick, to be honest. One thing, of course, with Foden, we know, compared to, let's say, Saka and Bellingham, is the minutes will probably be a little bit worse, right? He was that natural substitution for Cole Palmer. And I think that could be a substitution that we can see again within the final. But I do actually still really like Foden as the punt here for the final. And as I said, the odds are very good. The expected sort of numbers are also pretty positive for Foden. He's probably been very unfortunate to not have scored within this tournament so far, whereas obviously Saka and Bellingham have sort of gotten their plaudits with their goals and their assists. I'm not saying that this is not the great game for Bellingham or Saka, not at all, but just saying that I think Foden has looked brilliant, and he's definitely someone that I think I'd be interested in going for, just because I imagine his ownership will be a touch lower. In the next tier, I think you can pick from any players in this bracket to sort of round out your team, right? You can go with 4 midfielders, potentially 5. Keep in mind, of course, with the final, you're just fielding 11 players. So when you're choosing your attackers, you also have to sort of put into consideration whether you actually want to have, let's say, 2 strikers, maybe 3 strikers, and how that has an impact on your formation, right? Whether you're playing 3-4-3, 3-5-2, things like that. So assuming that, all things are equal, that's sort of why I've bucketed certain players, as yellow. And as you can see, Rodri is there. I think when I look at, for example, the odds, the tougher the games are, tentatively, of course, you can say that the penalty expectations are a little bit, less. At the same time, of course, we know Rodri has scored a goal as well, and he has done at many times for City. Depending, of course, on whether Spain, I guess, are able to take a stakehold within this game in the midfield sort of position within the match, I suppose Rodri can be a better pick. But right now, I do think it'll be quite a contested game. I'm not quite so sure if he'll get that many ball recoveries, and I think the same sort of logic applies to Rice as well. But I'm happy to be wrong. I think when I look at Spain versus France, for example, that was a game where the ball recoveries were definitely not so high for someone like Rodri, and I expect it to be a similar sort of style of game, if I'm being honest. And that's something to sort of think about with the French team. Of course, they actually got a lot of ball recoveries simply because of, in my opinion, how Spain operate at times. And it also comes down to the fact that, for example, a team like Spain will be very wing play dominant. Carvajal will come back, and it might mean the case that Spain are just a little bit better when it comes to keeping the ball. And that could also just sort of reduce the amount of recoveries in general. But I think we can expect, once again, as the games are a little bit more passive, I suppose, which tends to happen with finals, that ball recoveries aren't that high. Bellingham, Saka, still very good picks, much better minutes than Foden, of course. But I think there are the games, obviously, where, let's say, when Saka plays versus Ake, those are sort of tough matchups. But still, the odds are decent, right? He's still probably quite highly favored when it comes to goals and assists, just a little bit behind Bellingham and Foden respectively. Bellingham, of course, a little bit more goal dominant, less assist dominant, just in terms of our expectations for things. And of course, we continue to see him sort of occupying spots within the box within the game versus Netherlands anyway. So I'm really still thinking that all these picks are quite good. You sort of have to just pick wisely with who you want to go with. Foden, for a reason, has been selected simply because he is going to be quite a big differential within the final. As far as the other picks, I have to say Rice and Maino aren't that interesting to me. I think Maino probably, you could argue that he was the man of the match and maybe not Watkins, but of course Watkins got the crucial goal. So these arguments will always persist in judging player of the match. And ultimately, I think, the ball recovery numbers aren't high enough for Maino. And obviously, at the end of the day, he's still a center mid for a team that I think we're expecting to get much less of the ball, to be honest, versus Spain. So maybe his chances shine just isn't really there. Rice, of course, ball recovery is definitely a prevailing factor, but am I expecting for him to have such a great game? Potentially not, and I think I'd probably pass on Rice if I could. In the forward position, and this is why it's important to sort of mix the attackers together, because finally you sort of just picking between two teams here, and you're choosing one formation, and you're fielding a certain formation. I think some people might want to go for all 3 forwards, and I think that's fine. Morata, we know, will probably have reduced minutes, as he does in any game for Spain. And with Kane, we're starting to see the reduction of the minutes. And honestly, I have to be honest, he's still looked absolutely awful so far within this tournament. Whatever injury he has, if there is one, that's definitely a significant sort of impactful thing on him. But it still seems like he's going to start. As you could see, obviously, within the Netherlands game, the value of picking a penalty taker is sort of showing through, because whatever penalty Kane got, he got it, and he even earned it technically. So a lot of points for Kane. I was pretty sad to miss out on it, but also felt pretty annoyed, if I'm being completely honest. And that doesn't really matter at this moment in time. You still have the value of Kane as a penalty taker, and that's always going to be good. So that for me is mixed in with the fact that, of course, Morata, as you expect, would probably have a much better chance to score within his sort of time on the pitch, but it could be limited once again. And I think definitely more limited than, let's say, Kane, for example, where sometimes, of course, Kane can obviously play towards extra time a little bit at times. But with Watkins being so brilliant as well, who knows if some consideration will change. I don't think Kane will be benched for the finals, so we'll have to see how that goes on, but we'll find out as well with the lineups. And of course, you might be able to react proactively and go for Watkins if he somehow is available. But these are the players I expect to play, and I think these are the picks that I would probably go with. As far as the defense, just looking at that element of things, obviously, once again, Spain, slightly better clean sheet odds. Do we expect a clean sheet in this game? In my opinion, probably not. And I think for that reason, too, I'm probably a little bit less keen on going too deeply into the defenders. Of course, you can go for more than 3 defenders at this stage in the tournament. You can field, a big at the back formation. If you're super confident in one team's ability to maybe get a clean sheet, there's that. There's ball recoveries as well, which, as you can see, obviously, you know, when I subbed in, for example, players like Saka, like Bellingham, like Gakpo, I was definitely not expecting for them to get, you know, 1 or 2 points in a tough game. But the reality is that I suppose the defenders always have this sort of security blanket, I suppose, with getting ball recoveries. Whereas obviously, if the game is tight, if it's a cagey affair, if you can't choose the goal scorers correctly, then arguably the defenders provide a little bit of a higher floor compared to the higher ceiling of the attackers. And that's something to think about, because I think, once again, of course, clean sheet odds aren't particularly high, so we might expect for goals to happen. But at the same time, you're also not really seeing that many goals anyways, and it's hard to predict where they come from for the forward position. So you could obviously go big at the back, and I think my favorite defenders are going to be Guehi, Laporte, Carvajal, Cucurella, right? Carvajal for the attacking element, he's probably the only interesting player here that still has decent clean sheet odds. Shaw, of course, I think, you know, I actually expect him to start. There should be probably an asterisk on Shaw. Maybe they'll do the same thing with the Trippier situation, but I still think Shaw will probably start this game. Do I think he's going to be that electric in the game? Probably not. I like Cucurella and Laporte and Guehi in particular for the ball recoveries. They've shown to be really good at that within this tournament so far, and they also probably should have really good minutes once again within the final. So no real concerns with those players. And then the next tier are players like Walker and Stones, who just really haven't cut it at all when it comes to ball recovery. Stones even worse than Walker with Lenormand. He's probably going to come back and start for Spain. But as I said, you know, going back to, let's say, the Germany game and thinking about that 45-minute substitution, I just think it's too much of a risk to take. Yes, of course, his ownership might be low, but who knows if he's going to be an early sub once again, because clearly Nacho has proven to be someone who is, you know, a key part of this team and has played a pretty significant role for the team within this tournament so far. And then in the goalkeepers, I would actually say that they're probably quite similar, right? Even if you expect Pickford to have less clean sheet odds, I'd expect, of course, Spain conversely to sort of put England a little bit more under pressure, maybe with more shots, and potentially, of course, that just means avenues for Pickfords to make saves. Once again, I think it's very close. And also another thing to mention too is I would probably still prefer going for, let's say, Spanish defenders, as in, let's say, a Laporte, a Cucurella, over, let's say, going for Simon, right? I think there's probably an arguably higher ceiling anyways with picking the sort of winning team's defender than, let's say, going for the losing team's or the winning team's goalkeeper. So for that reason, I think Pickford makes a lot of sense in terms of squad construction. Once you start to build a team, you might actually prefer going for Pickford as your goalkeeper, because that allows you to go for players like Carvajal, like Laporte, etc., etc. So that's going to be, you know, the cheat sheet. It's a short, it's a sweet one. I hope you guys enjoyed the video and enjoy the finals, more importantly, and, you know, celebrate the end of a great tournament. Otherwise, take care, goodbye, and I'll see you guys soon for potentially some FPL content as well.